all the kids in my ninth grade class who are kind of following the little bit more advanced track to set themselves up for, being strong in 10th grade English or possibly taking an honors English next year. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Great Depression in order to set you up to read Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck, which is this novel set in this kind of dusty agricultural part of California, Salinas, Anyway, George and Lennie are there. They're super poor. And I remember when I read it, I was confused. Why were they there? Why did they go someplace better? Why did they have these jobs? Maybe I kind of heard my teacher say something about the Great Depression, but even if I had, I don't think I associated with the Great Depression with anything other than something that happened in New York. And that was the stock market crash of 1929. And that happens when suddenly stock prices drop. So just to understand what stocks are, basically, is, and that's all I can give you is basically, because I'm not a finance person, but basically we can all invest in companies. We can say, I think that Apple is a great company. If you did this 15 years ago, you're happy today. And I'm going to buy a little bit of Apple stock. So I'll own a little tiny bit of Apple, or maybe if I have more money, I'll own a lot of Apple. And if Apple can use my money to build more factories and make more iPhones and invent more iWatches or whatever they're called, they'll get richer, and then my investment will go up. It'll be worth more, and it literally does. So you could buy it for $110, and today it might be worth $700 or something. So in any event, that's why people buy. But sometimes people are hoping it's going to go up, and then the companies just crash. The stock goes down. It might go up someday. Sometimes they go out of business, and in the meantime, people have lost a lot of money. And in the Great Depression, there was something that made it worse, and I'll tell you about that. So basically, this is this kind of hysteria. You can see here the stock market has crashed. Everybody's out in the street. They don't know what to do. It's New York, 1929. So the causes, which you've already mentioned, are speculation. They think they're going to get rich quick. And we've have similar things that keep happening with real estate or so forth. I'll buy this house, and it's for a lot of money, and I can barely afford the mortgage. But in another 3 years, I'll be able to flip it, turn it around, and I'll be able to get make $100,000. And guess what? If the price of the house drops, all of a sudden you can't afford that mortgage. Well, and your house is worth nothing. And that's exactly what happened with stocks, just not with houses. And the thing that I remember I said something was worse in the Great Depression was that people were buying on margin. Essentially, they were always, kind of like with the houses, you're borrowing that money, but they were borrowing money to buy stocks, which I don't know if people do anymore because I'm just not that sophisticated with all that stuff. But they were buying on margin at that time, which meant they were only putting 10% down. So not only was it like, oh, you bought Apple hoping it was going up and it crashed, but now you owe all this money because you have to pay back the loan, where now most of us don't. If you buy stocks, you don't buy it with a loan. You just buy it with what you've got. And I don't know if there's laws with that. I'll have to learn that in my next life. Okay. So anyway, they bought on margin, which was a loan, and now not only did their investment is worth nothing, is their investment worth nothing, they now owe money, which is just like, oh God, devastating. So let's see what happens next. At first people don't realize how bad it is. Here's a picture of Bad Thursday when the selling was triggered. So all of a sudden everybody's trying to sell their stock before things go any lower. You can see there's some smiles. People are not quite yet realizing, that this was going to go on for a number of years. And just how bad it was going to be. So you see the trading floor here. That means they're trying to sell things, buy things, maybe, who knows. But again, they're taking pictures of it, but it still doesn't look to me like people realize just yet how bad this is, if the image is in fact from after the crash. And that's just trading floor is a term. It's where trading activities are conducted. I don't know how much that works anymore, and there's obviously a lot of stuff that happens online, and that's for you who go major in economics and whatever, and go work in the stock exchange. All right, so anyway, run on the bank. Everybody's finding out that not only is this worth nothing, but the banks are now in it, and they're about to be out of money, and you're going to go to get your money out of the bank, and there's going to be nothing there. So they had what was called a run on the bank. So we're still seeing a lot of stuff that's happening in cities and so on and so forth, and people are selling whatever they have just to they've lost all their money. They had these nice cars, they were living these fancy lives, and suddenly they're just desperate for cash. So this is a speculator, somebody who was hoping he was going to make a lot of money, and now he's got none, and he probably owes money, so he's going to have to sell his car. And then you started to really see the effects of it. People became very hungry. People went bankrupt. They had to close businesses, lost jobs, and you started to see these bread lines where people were just waiting in line to be able just to get some food because they had absolutely no income, and there was at that time no real social welfare system. It was just basically people setting up bread lines, but there was no EBT or food stamps or anything like that to help people. It was just charity was all there was. And this famous violence broke out. There was these bonus army marchers who had fought in World War I prior to a number of years prior, and they were supposed to get money from the government, and they wanted it now because they were, they needed money. And the government came out, they marched for it, and there was quite a bit of violence and just unrest because people were desperate. And you can see this is a really fascinating image of children in the city dump. So people going through and collecting what they could to get anything probably to sell of value. And a really great, there's one right back here maybe. I think there's just the two. Is that one? Oh. Yeah, there we go, right over there. There's a little face, and obviously she's in the foreground. And it's just that kind of overexposure and monochromatic, sort of almost single color image, just shows that people just like objects were being thrown away. So it's a very powerful image. And again, you can see these bread lines are getting longer and longer and going around the block, quite literally. 25% of people who could work were unemployed. So unemployment was, that should have been 55. That probably should have been 35, I would say, but maybe even 33. Something got doubled there. That wasn't the right number. So I'll give you this presentation, and maybe we can correct that. So definitely not 55. Now, at the same time, there was this massive drought. So this now starts to affect not just cities, but agricultural centers, particularly in the Midwest, where they just, farmers were, unable to sell, grow produce. I think there was a fair amount of overproduction as well. But prior to that, there were a lot of factors to learn about, and those are all things that, you could find out more about. But basically, now we have this drought, and farmers are going bankrupt as well. And with the drought came the dust storms. I once saw something, I think it was on this Ken Burns documentary about the dust storm, where they talked about how actually Native American people had warned farmers who were coming, Yankee white people who are coming around saying, we have these really tall grasses, and if you pull them all up for farming, when the wind comes, that it's going to create an enormous problem, because those grasses were actually they had very, very deep roots, so they were holding the earth in place, and they did have drought periods and winds, but these dust storms were incredible. So what you're seeing there is dust, just this incredible dust, and I guess this trying to get away from it, because it was actually quite dangerous. You could choke to death from it if you just got caught in the middle of it. People ran in the houses, it just filled your nose, your lungs, everything. It was just an enormous amount. So this is happening as well. So all the people who might have worked in agriculture in the Midwest suddenly also don't have jobs. And at the same time, African American people were really, really seriously affected, because there was already discrimination, and now white people are like, wait a minute, if they should not get jobs before we have jobs, unfortunately, this is just inevitable, looking out for what one appears to be oneself in this kind of, fantasized self versus not self thing that we always make. We are not all the same, when of course we are. So now charitable organizations were excluding African American people from their soup kitchens, and it made it harder for them to find jobs. And so anybody who was discriminated against, that was only going to be exacerbated, made worse by that sense of desperation. And people were just riding freight trains, probably just jumping on and seeing if they could, get a ride to California, hopefully, to get a job in agriculture where they were not as affected by this drought. So here's Mexican families looking for work in pea farming. And again, same type of thing where, Mexican people were, facing discrimination. People saw them at that time as well as taking jobs away. There was this repatriation where they were putting probably not just immigrants, people who had come from Mexico, but people who maybe had never lived in what was then Mexico proper were being sent there. And some went voluntarily, but many were forced into it. So that's another really interesting part of this history and very sad. Much more to learn there. There's a couple of situations over time where that occurred with Mexican people being sent back. But this was because of the fear of not having jobs enough and just, ginning up that, that kind of us versus them mentality. So in any event, let's see. What do we have next here? Whoops, did I go with something? Oh, well, let's say we did. Anyway, this is a migrant family. Dorothea Lange was paid by the United States government to document what was happening with the Great Depression across the country. And this actually, they had gotten to the border of California, and even though was one country at that point, they were still refused entrance. The authorities told them they had to go back. They could not come unless they had money, because people were just so desperate. They didn't want any more people coming in with a need that needed to be filled. So, everybody was, if you're poor, you're discriminated against and not allowed to come across state lines. If you're, Mexican of Mexican descent, which is a very broad term, but we'll use it, you might have been sent back to Mexico or sent to Mexico when you had always lived in California. Or Texas. I don't know exactly what's going on in Texas, but I would assume similar. And if you're African American, you are more likely to be treated without compassion and shut out of jobs and charitable resources offered through charity. Okay, let's see. And here we go. So. People actually at that time, one of the positive things was that and Asians as well, because it's the same type of thing. You have a lot of bringing people in for the purpose of Japanese Americans in terms of, harvesting, crops when we needed people, and Chinese Americans building railroads. And as soon as we don't need those people, then all of a sudden there's a lot of backlash and mistreatment of people, and that was happening as well. But the good thing is that it kind of made people see, like, well, we've got to come together because we are a community, and the sad part is that we're not going to assimilate as easily, and we are going to be mistreated, but we have cultural pride, and they did strengthen cultural ties to work together in order to protect themselves. And so again, Dorothea Lange, that's not the name of the people that you're looking at. It's always the name of the photographer who's very famous, and she took pictures of Manzanar as well, and very, very interesting. And this grandmother of 22 children was living in a tent had come from a farm in Oklahoma. She's 80 years old, and she says if you lose your pluck, you lose the most there is in you, all you've got to live with. And she said that in 1936. You just have to keep going. That people did. And here's another image, a very, very famous one called Migrant Mother. You see she's with her 3 children. It took me a long, long time to notice the baby in the image because that's me. But there's 3 children that she's there. Dorothea Lange took this picture. And there's the same woman. You can kind of see they captured her at the exact same angle when she was 79, and linked to that image in the presentation is the article that came from. And they asked her in an interview, they said, did you ever lose hope? The interviewer said, she asked, and she said, nope. She said, snapping off a flower to take a sniff, if I'd have lost hope, this country never would have made it. And in the video, there's no flower, no sniff, and what she says is, no, if I'd lost hope, I'd never have made it. Okay. So anyway, people just kept going. It's what they did. And I'm sure many people did not survive. But when you see George and Lennie, you now understand that they were in this place of abject desperation, total, just so little for everybody, kind of a competition, particularly amongst the poorest people. You'll see some stuff with the African-American character, Crooks, who's not treated particularly well. Women are not treated particularly well. And you'll understand why they are there and how the forces of desperation are pushing on them and affecting their behavior. So I hope that will help to give you some context for this great book. All right. Cool. See you on the other side.